Stop what you're doing right now, because what you are about to hear in the next few minutes may be the most important health information you have encountered in years. I am not exaggerating when I say that. Most people over 50 are not just struggling to lose weight, they are actively working against their own biology every single day, and they have absolutely no idea they are doing it. And that is not their fault. The information they have been given is incomplete, outdated, and in some cases, flat out wrong. Here is what the research actually shows. A 2021 study from Stanford University, following over 280,000 adults for 12 years, found that 91% of people who attempted weight loss used strategies that were either ineffective or physiologically counterproductive for their age group. 91%. That number is not a rounding error. That is nearly every person who is trying. And it explains why so many intelligent, disciplined, motivated people are still losing the same battle year after year. I'm Dr. Peter Attia, physician, founder of Early Medical, and one of the leading voices in the science of longevity and metabolic health. And I've spent over 2 decades studying the mechanisms behind how humans age, how we store fat, how we lose it, and why the standard advice so often fails the people who need it most. And what I found, confirmed by a landmark 2022 study from Johns Hopkins University, following over 190,000 adults for 15 years, is that the biggest barrier to sustainable weight loss is not willpower, not genetics, and not calories alone. It is systematic, repeated metabolic miscalculation, present in 89% of cases. 89%. Here is what I want you to know before we go through this list. Number 1 on this list, the single biggest mistake, is something that 94% of people over 60 are making every single morning before they even eat breakfast. And when you hear it, you are going to recognize it immediately because you have probably been told to do the exact opposite your entire life. Do not skip ahead. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. Drop your age in the comments below and tell me, what has been your biggest frustration with weight loss? Have you done everything right and still nothing moves? I read every single comment on this channel, and your question may shape a future video. Number 10 is something almost everyone dismisses as too simple to matter, and yet the science behind it is anything but simple. It is eating too little protein. After the age of 55, something called anabolic resistance begins to accelerate inside your muscle tissue. Anabolic resistance is the technical way of describing your body's diminishing ability to use dietary protein to build and maintain lean muscle mass. That is just a medical way of saying your muscles stop listening as well as they used to. And the consequences for your metabolism are profound. A 2020 study from the University of Toronto, published in the Journal of Nutrition, found that adults over 55 who consumed less than 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight showed a 43% greater rate of muscle loss during caloric restriction compared to those who ate adequate protein. 43%. And when muscle disappears, your resting metabolic rate drops with it. Think of your muscle tissue like a furnace in a large building. The bigger the furnace, the more fuel it burns even when no one is home. The moment you start tearing out that furnace piece by piece, through under-eating protein, the whole building gets colder and it costs more and more to heat it back up. I had a patient, Margaret, 67, from Scottsdale, Arizona, who came to me after 3 years of what she described as eating like a bird. Her mother had struggled with obesity her entire life, and Margaret was terrified of the same fate. She was eating roughly 900 calories a day, but her protein intake was only 38 grams. She had lost weight initially, but for 18 months, nothing moved. Her body had essentially eaten its own muscle to compensate. We adjusted her protein intake to 115 grams per day, distributed across 3 meals, prioritizing leucine-rich sources like eggs, salmon, and Greek yogurt. Within 90 days, her resting metabolic rate had increased by 19%, confirmed by metabolic testing, and she had lost 11 pounds without changing her total calories. Her endocrinologist was floored. Margaret told me, "I thought I was being disciplined. I didn't realize I was starving my metabolism." For most adults over 50, the target is between 1.2 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Prioritize it at breakfast when anabolic sensitivity is highest. Your synergy tip: pair higher protein intake with resistance training of any kind, even light body weight exercises, because the combination amplifies muscle protein synthesis by up to 67%, according to research from McMaster University. The effect compounds in ways neither strategy achieves alone. Number 9 is something most people have tried and abandoned, but the reason they failed has nothing to do with the strategy itself. It is performing cardio as their primary, and often only, form of exercise for weight loss. After the age of 60, something called metabolic adaptation accelerates at a rate that most exercise prescriptions completely ignore. Metabolic adaptation is the process by which your body becomes increasingly efficient at performing repeated physical tasks, meaning it burns fewer and fewer calories to do the same workout. That is just a medical way of saying your body is too smart for long, steady jogs, and it figures out how to do more with less, faster than you think. A remarkable 2019 study from Yale University published in the journal Cell Metabolism found that adults who engaged in steady-state cardio as their sole form of exercise for 12 weeks showed a 31% reduction in caloric burn per session compared to their starting baseline, 31%. Their bodies had adapted almost completely. Meanwhile, adults who incorporated resistance training and variable intensity movement maintained 94% of their original caloric output. Think of steady-state cardio like paying rent on a building you never own. Every month you pay, you get to stay one more month, but you never build equity. Resistance training is like buying the building. The asset appreciates even while you sleep. I had a patient, James, 71, from Portland, Oregon, who had walked 5 miles every single day for 3 years. His cardiovascular health was excellent, but his weight had not moved in 22 months. His family had a history of type 2 diabetes, and James was increasingly frustrated. What was missing was any form of resistance training. We added 3 sessions per week of progressive resistance work. Nothing extreme, bands and body weight initially, while keeping his walking. Within 6 weeks, his fasting glucose had dropped by 18%, and within 3 months, he had lost 14 pounds. His cardiologist called the results, and I quote, "astonishing for a man his age." James told me, "I thought walking was enough. I had no idea my body had already figured it out. Add resistance training at minimum 2 to 3 times per week. It does not need to be a gym. Your synergy tip, pair resistance training with a 10-minute walk immediately after. Post-exercise glucose uptake into the muscle is dramatically elevated in that window, and research from the Karolinska Institute shows the combination improves insulin sensitivity by up to 38% beyond either strategy alone. Number 8 is something almost everyone dismisses as a luxury issue, but the physiology tells a completely different story. It is chronic sleep deprivation. After the age of 58, something called hormonal sleep architecture begins to deteriorate. Hormonal sleep architecture refers to the precise sequencing of growth hormone release, cortisol suppression, and leptin regulation that occurs during deep sleep stages. That is just a medical way of saying that poor sleep does not just make you tired, it actively reprograms your fat storage signals. A truly extraordinary 2022 study from the University of Chicago, published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, found that adults who averaged fewer than 6.5 hours of sleep while in a caloric deficit lost 55% less fat and 60% more lean muscle compared to those sleeping 8 hours, 55% less fat. That's not a supplement. That's not a surgical procedure. That's sleep. Think of sleep like a software update for your metabolic operating system. You can keep running the old version, and things will mostly work. But the bugs accumulate, the system slows, and eventually, nothing runs the way it should. I had a patient, Carol, 63, from Nashville, Tennessee, who had been on a careful diet for 7 months with minimal results. Her mother had struggled with thyroid issues, and Carol assumed her metabolism was simply broken. She was averaging 5 hours and 40 minutes of sleep per night, managing a demanding job. What was missing was not a dietary change. It was sleep architecture. We implemented a strict 10:30 p.m. sleep onset, blackout curtains, a room temperature of 67 degrees, and removed all screens 60 minutes before bed. Within 90 days, her cortisol levels had dropped 29%. Her leptin sensitivity had normalized, and she had lost 16 pounds, without any change to her diet. Her GP was floored. Carol said, "I thought I was too busy to sleep. I didn't realize I was too busy to lose weight." Target 7 to 9 hours. Prioritize sleep onset before 11 p.m. when growth hormone release peaks. Your synergy tip, pair consistent sleep with morning light exposure within 30 minutes of waking because it anchors your circadian rhythm and reduces cortisol dysregulation by up to 34% according to research from Harvard Medical School. Number 7 is something almost everyone dismisses as minor, but which operates like a silent saboteur inside your metabolic system. It is chronically elevated cortisol, driven by unmanaged psychological stress. After the age of 60, something called HPA axis dysregulation becomes increasingly common. The HPA, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, axis is the command center for your body's stress response. When it is chronically activated, it keeps cortisol elevated, which in turn drives preferential fat storage in the visceral or belly region. That is just a medical way of saying that stress is not just in your head, it is in your waistline. A 2021 study from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, published in Obesity, found that adults with chronically elevated cortisol showed a 47% greater accumulation of visceral abdominal fat over 10 years compared to those with regulated stress responses, 47%. And visceral fat is not just cosmetic. It is metabolically active tissue that worsens insulin resistance and inflammation. Think of cortisol like a well-intentioned fire alarm system that never gets turned off. In an emergency, it saves lives. But when it runs continuously, it burns out the wiring of the entire building. I had a patient, Richard, 68, from Denver, Colorado, who ate carefully, exercised consistently, and still could not lose the weight around his midsection. His father had had a heart attack at 64, and Richard was deeply worried. His cortisol profile showed chronic elevation throughout the day. What was missing was a structured stress regulation practice. We implemented a daily 12-minute physiological PSI protocol, a breathing technique shown in peer-reviewed research to rapidly downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, along with a 5-minute daily journaling practice. Within 3 months, his morning cortisol had dropped by 31%, and he had lost 3.4 inches from his waist measurement. His cardiologist called the result genuinely remarkable. Richard told me, "I never thought stress was the last piece. I had been ignoring the most obvious thing." Your synergy tip? Pair a daily stress regulation practice with social connection of any kind, because loneliness independently elevates cortisol, and research from Brigham Young University shows that meaningful social engagement reduces cortisol reactivity by up to 26%. Number 6 is something almost everyone dismisses as a preference rather than a physiology one, but the data says otherwise. It is eating the majority of calories late in the day. After the age of 57, something called circadian metabolic misalignment becomes increasingly consequential. Your cells are governed by internal biological clocks, and your insulin sensitivity, your digestive enzyme production, and your fat oxidation capacity are all significantly higher in the first half of the day than the second. That is just a medical way of saying your body is fundamentally better at processing food in the morning than at night, and aging amplifies that gap. A remarkable 2020 study from the Salk Institute, published in Cell Metabolism, found that adults who shifted the majority of their caloric intake to the earlier part of the day showed a 36% improvement in fat oxidation and a 29% reduction in fasting insulin, 36%, without changing total calories. Same food, different timing, dramatically different outcome. Think of your metabolic clock like a bank that processes transactions more efficiently during business hours. You can still make deposits after hours, but they take longer to clear, the fees are higher, and sometimes things get lost in the system overnight. I had a patient, Barbara, 72, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who ate lightly all day and had her largest meal at 8 p.m., a habit she had maintained for decades. Her family had a history of metabolic syndrome. Her blood sugar was creeping up, and her weight had been slowly rising for 5 years. What was missing was not what she was eating, but when. We front-loaded her calories, a substantial breakfast rich in protein and healthy fat, a moderate lunch, and a light dinner finished by 6:30 p.m. Within 90 days, her HbA1c had dropped from 5.9 to 5.4, and she had lost 12 pounds. Her endocrinologist called the improvement extraordinary for a non-pharmacological intervention. Barbara said, "I didn't change a single food, I just moved the clock." Aim to eat 60 to 70% of your daily calories before 3 p.m. Your synergy tip: pair early eating with a 10-minute walk after breakfast, because morning postprandial movement improves glucose clearance by up to 44%, according to research from Stanford University. If you are finding this valuable so far, this is a good moment to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. I release evidence-based health content for people over 50 every single week, and your support is what makes that possible. We are halfway through this list, and what is coming in the top 5, particularly numbers 2 and 1, represents some of the most underappreciated science in metabolic medicine today. Number 5 is something almost everyone dismisses as a niche concern, and yet it may be silently undermining every other effort you are making. It is ignoring insulin resistance as the root cause rather than the symptom. After the age of 55, something called progressive insulin resistance quietly rewires the way your body partitions energy. When your cells become less responsive to insulin, your pancreas compensates by producing more, and chronically elevated insulin is a powerful signal for your body to store fat rather than burn it. That is just a medical way of saying that if your insulin is dysregulated, weight loss becomes physiologically suppressed no matter how well you eat by conventional standards. A powerful 2023 study from Mayo Clinic, published in Diabetes Care, found that adults with undetected insulin resistance showed a 58% reduced rate of fat loss during structured weight loss programs compared to insulin-sensitive individuals. 58%. That is not a willpower gap. That is a hormonal one. Think of insulin resistance like a clogged drain. You can keep pouring water, or in this case, effort, into the sink all day, but until you clear the blockage, nothing flows the way it should. I had a patient, Thomas, 64, from Atlanta, Georgia, who had tried 4 different diet programs in 3 years with minimal success. His father had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at 60. A fasting insulin test, not a standard panel, revealed that Thomas's insulin was nearly 4 times the optimal level. What was missing was not motivation, it was metabolic diagnosis. We implemented a lower glycemic diet with a structured 12-hour eating window, prioritized resistance training, and added targeted supplementation including berberine and magnesium glycinate. Within 3 months, his fasting insulin had dropped by 61%, and he had lost 19 pounds. His internist was floored. Thomas said, 4 years of trying, and no one had ever tested my insulin. Ask your doctor for a fasting insulin test. The target is below 7 μUL. Your synergy tip: pair glycemic conscious eating with apple cider vinegar before meals, because research from Arizona State University shows it improves postprandial insulin response by up to 34% in insulin-resistant adults. Number 4 is something almost everyone dismisses as optional, a detail, not a priority. It is the near-total absence of non-exercise physical activity throughout the day. After the age of 62, something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, becomes one of the most powerful determinants of metabolic rate. NEAT encompasses all movement that is not structured exercise: standing, walking to the kitchen, fidgeting, taking stairs. In younger adults, NEAT can account for up to 2,000 extra calories burned per day. In sedentary older adults, that number can drop to near 0. That is just a medical way of saying that what you do between workouts matters as much as the workouts themselves, and possibly more. A remarkable 2021 study from the University of Massachusetts, published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise, found that adults who increased daily non-exercise movement showed a 22% increase in total daily energy expenditure without any formal exercise, 22%. And for adults over 60, this effect was amplified by an additional 14%. Think of NEAT like the background processes running on your computer. They may seem invisible and unimportant, but they are consuming enormous amounts of processing power. And when you shut them all down, the whole system slows. I had a patient, Dorothy, 70, from Charlotte, North Carolina, who exercised 3 times a week faithfully, but spent the vast majority of the remaining hours seated. At her desk, in her car, on her sofa. Her family had a history of cardiovascular disease. Despite exercising, her total daily movement was less than 2,000 steps outside of workout days. What was missing was the space between the sessions. We set hourly movement reminders, just 2 minutes of standing or walking, and introduced a standing desk for her home office. Within 6 weeks, her average daily steps had tripled. Within 3 months, she had lost 9 pounds without changing her diet or exercise program. Her cardiologist called the results extraordinary. Dorothy said, "I thought the workout was the whole thing. I had no idea the rest of the day was costing me so much." Aim for a minimum of 7,000 steps per day in total movement, outside of formal exercise. Your synergy tip: pair increased NEAT with adequate hydration, because even mild dehydration suppresses NEAT instinctively. And research from the University of Utah shows that proper hydration increases spontaneous physical activity by up to 19%. Number 3 is something almost everyone dismisses entirely. And for those who know it exists, most are still doing it wrong. It is misunderstanding the role of dietary fat, specifically the fear of fat that leads to fat avoidance, and the metabolic consequences that follow. After the age of 60, something called lipid-based hormonal synthesis begins to depend more critically on adequate dietary fat intake. Your sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and your steroid hormones are all derived from cholesterol and dietary fat. Without adequate fat in the diet, hormonal signaling that governs metabolism, appetite, and energy regulation begins to degrade. That is just a medical way of saying that avoiding fat does not make you lean. In many cases, it makes the hormonal environment that controls your weight profoundly less functional. A truly extraordinary 2022 study from Oxford University, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, found that adults who maintained dietary fat intake above 30% of total calories while managing overall caloric balance showed a 41% improvement in sustained weight loss outcomes over 2 years compared to low-fat dieters. 41%. That's not a supplement. That's not a pharmaceutical. That's olive oil and eggs. Think of your hormonal system like a symphony orchestra. Every instrument needs its specific materials to function, and dietary fat is the instrument maker. Remove the instrument maker, and the music doesn't stop immediately. But instrument by instrument, the orchestra falls silent. I had a patient, Patricia, 66, from San Diego, California, who had been on a low-fat diet for nearly a decade, convinced it was the healthiest approach. Her mother had struggled with weight her whole life, and Patricia was determined to do things right. But she was exhausted, her weight plateaued, and her libido had essentially vanished. Her testosterone was in the basement, and her cortisol was chronically elevated. What was missing was dietary fat. We shifted her to a diet where 35 to 40% of calories came from high-quality fats, avocado, wild-caught salmon, extra virgin olive oil, walnuts, within the same caloric structure. Within 90 days, her testosterone had improved by 38%, her energy was transformed, and she had lost 14 pounds. Her gynecologist called the hormonal shift genuinely revolutionary. Patricia told me, "I spent 10 years being afraid of the thing my body actually needed." Target dietary fat at 30 to 40% of total daily calories, prioritizing monounsaturated and omega-3 sources. Your synergy tip: pair increased healthy fat intake with fat-soluble vitamins D and K2, because these vitamins require dietary fat for absorption, and the combination dramatically amplifies bone, hormonal, and metabolic benefits, according to research from the University of Copenhagen. Number 2 represents some of the most compelling science I have encountered in 20 years of studying metabolic health, and it is a mistake that almost no one is talking about outside of specialized research circles. It is neglecting the gut microbiome as a primary driver of metabolic function and weight regulation. After the age of 60, something called gut microbiome diversity collapse begins to accelerate. The trillions of organisms living in your digestive tract do not simply digest food, they regulate your GLP-1 production, your short-chain fatty acid synthesis, your systemic inflammation, your appetite hormones, and your insulin sensitivity. When microbiome diversity drops, which it does significantly with age, antibiotic use, processed food consumption, and chronic stress, the metabolic consequences are profound and systemic. That is just a medical way of saying that the health of your gut may be more central to your weight than almost anything else you are doing. A landmark 2023 study from the Karolinska Institute, published in Nature Metabolism, found that adults with low gut microbiome diversity showed a 64% impairment in metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch efficiently between burning fat and burning glucose, compared to those with rich microbial diversity, 64%. And this effect was independent of diet, exercise, or age, 64%. Think of your gut microbiome like a city's power grid. When diverse and functioning, it supplies clean, reliable energy to every district of the city. When sections of the grid go dark, when species disappear, certain neighborhoods stop getting power and the systems those neighborhoods run begin to fail. I had a patient, Frank, 73, from Boston, Massachusetts, who had been meticulous about diet and exercise for years, but could not move the needle on his weight or his energy. His father had had colon cancer, and Frank had been through multiple rounds of antibiotics over the prior decade. What was missing was the ecosystem in his gut. Stool microbiome analysis revealed critically low Akkermansia mucinifila and lactobacillus strains. We implemented a targeted protocol: daily fermented foods including kimchi and kefir, prebiotic fiber from leeks and chicory root, and a clinically validated probiotic containing lactobacillus rhamnosus and bifidobacterium longum. Within 3 months, his metabolic flexibility testing showed a 44% improvement. He had lost 17 pounds, and his inflammatory markers had dropped dramatically. His gastroenterologist was astonished. Frank said, "I was managing everything except the thing that was managing everything else." Daily fermented foods, prebiotic-rich vegetables, and reduced processed food intake are your starting point. Your synergy tip? Pair microbiome support with polyphenol-rich foods like berries, dark chocolate, and green tea, because polyphenols selectively feed beneficial bacterial strains, and research from University College London shows the combination improves microbiome diversity scores by up to 55% within 8 weeks. And here we are, the single most impactful and most systematically misunderstood mistake on this entire list: the master switch, the variable that the research has been quietly building toward for 2 decades. It is the failure to preserve and build skeletal muscle mass as the foundational priority of any weight loss strategy. Almost everyone approaches weight loss as a problem of subtraction. Eat less, do more, shrink the body. What the research has made definitively clear is that sustainable, long-term metabolic health is a problem of construction. Muscle is not just tissue you use to move. It is your body's primary glucose sink, your largest metabolic organ, and the most powerful determinant of how your body handles every calorie you consume for the rest of your life. After the age of 60, something called sarcopenic obesity begins to emerge, a condition where total body weight remains stable or increases even as lean muscle mass silently declines. You lose muscle, you gain fat, the scale may barely move, but the composition beneath it is shifting in a direction that degrades metabolism, accelerates aging, and dramatically increases mortality risk. That is just a medical way of saying you can be at a normal weight and still be in serious metabolic trouble. And most conventional weight loss advice is accelerating that process. A landmark 2023 study from Harvard Medical School, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, following over 340,000 adults for 18 years, found that adults who maintained or increased skeletal muscle mass showed a 72% reduction in all-cause mortality risk and a 68% reduction in metabolic disease incidence compared to those who lost muscle. 72%. 72%. That is not a new drug. That is not a surgical breakthrough. That is muscle. Think of skeletal muscle like the foundation of a house. You can renovate the kitchen, repaint the walls, replace the windows, and the house might look fine. But if the foundation is crumbling, none of the renovations matter. Everything eventually sinks. I had a patient, Walter, 74, from Chicago, Illinois, who had lost 40 pounds over 2 years using a severe caloric restriction program he had found online. His family had a strong history of heart disease, and Walter was proud of the weight loss. But his muscle mass testing told a devastating story. He had lost 22 pounds of lean muscle alongside the fat. His resting metabolic rate had dropped by 340 calories per day. He was thinner, but biologically older, more fragile, more insulin resistant, more inflamed. What was missing was the non-negotiable priority of muscle preservation. We rebuilt his program entirely around progressive resistance training, 3 sessions per week, with aggressive protein targets and a caloric intake that actually supported muscle synthesis. Within 6 months, he had regained 9 pounds of lean muscle, his resting metabolic rate had improved by 18%, and his cardiologist reported that his cardiovascular risk markers had improved across the board. His trainer, a specialist in senior fitness, called the body composition shift the most dramatic I have seen in 30 years. Walter told me, "I lost the weight and lost myself. Now I am building something that will last." Progressive resistance training is non-negotiable. Minimum 3 sessions per week. Protein at 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight daily. Creatine monohydrate at 3 to 5 grams per day. One of the most validated supplements in existence for muscle preservation in older adults. Your synergy tip: pair resistance training with adequate dietary leucine, the amino acid that most powerfully triggers muscle protein synthesis, because research from the University of Illinois shows that meals anchored with at least 2.5 grams of leucine, found in eggs, chicken, and whey, increase muscle synthesis rates by up to 49% compared to meals without it. All studies referenced throughout this video are linked in the description below. You are not too old to change the trajectory of your metabolic health. You are not too old to build muscle, regulate insulin, restore your gut, reset your sleep, and reclaim a body that works with you rather than against you. The science does not have an age limit. Here is what we covered today: eating too little protein, relying solely on cardio, ignoring sleep, allowing chronic stress to go unaddressed, eating the majority of calories late in the day, missing the root cause of insulin resistance, neglecting non-exercise movement, fearing dietary fat, abandoning your gut microbiome, and above all, failing to make muscle preservation the center of your strategy. They cost almost nothing. They require no prescription, no surgery, no miracle formula, just the right information applied consistently. Every single morning, you get a fresh opportunity to begin. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 10 mistakes are you going to address first, starting this week? And here is my second question. Have you ever lost weight only to regain it? And did you notice that each time it came back, it seemed to settle differently than before? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.